Alright, so I'm back from vacation and I have a lot of prepping to do, and I figured why not make a video. I get asked this question a lot, how do you prep the pewter micros? Really, it's the same thing as prepping any resin or plastic. It just requires a little more elbow grease, but there's some tools that can make your life a lot easier. I like to use a lot these needle files. They are great for the metal guys, because it's less effort than like sandpaper or anything else really. So these are the main tool I use for these guys. You also will need, you can use regular nail files too that help. Carbide scrapers sometimes, if there's a really tough area for me to get off, like a really tough seam that I need to scrape or something, these do work on these guys. But just be careful that you don't, press too hard because you might snap the tip. I did that once on a pewter, but it could have just been that the tip was weak, because I really shouldn't do that. So, but either way, just be careful. I also like to use sanding sponges. This is just cut from a larger one I got at the hardware store. You don't need this, but I think it's a great tool to use on these guys. This is, what do you call it, stainless steel wool, the polishing wool. I got this at the hardware store also. This is 0000 grit, which is very fine. It's okay. You might want to get a little higher grit because it kind of falls apart. Like this will like go down to nothing, and like you'll have little specks everywhere. But this I use for buffing towards the end, because when you start prepping these guys with the files and the sandpaper, I mean you can use sandpaper too, I didn't mention that. It's going to start looking like a big mess. It's going to look like it has a bunch of scratches everywhere, but that's because the pewter is so reflective that it reflects every single little thing, no matter how small, but usually primer is going to cover most of that, even a thin layer. So this, towards the end, buffs it out really nice, so it makes it a little more presentable and smooth for you to see what you're actually missing and need to continue to prep, but it's not 100% necessary. It just makes things easier. What else you're going to need is some sort of epoxy. This is Magic Sculpt, or you can use epoxy sculpt. I actually like, well, this is for small little divots and things. You're going to need epoxy if you need like large fixes. But I mostly use this stuff, the Bondo glazing and spot putty. There's other kinds as well. There's the plastic metal. This works great as well. This one though is a little thicker and a little bit more difficult to apply. The problem with these are that they're highly toxic, and they like the fumes, they smell so bad. So you have to wear a respirator when you use this. There's other things like modeling paste, which is non-toxic. The only problem with modeling paste is that you can't really wash the model afterwards, because it's water soluble, so basically it comes right off, and it's not really sturdy. The Bondo is like the sturdiest thing I've found. If you look on my blog, I actually have a whole bunch of different putties and glazes that I've tried for prepping, and what I think of them and how they work and stuff. So, but my go-to is the red one, the Bondo glazing and spot putty recently. So let's get started. So what you first want to do is take a look around and see what you need to do. You probably have a few seams, mostly on the belly here. Let me see. This guy's actually not too terrible. He's got a bunch of little divots and stuff that you're going to need to fill. But you want to pretty much start with the seams and stuff. I also wanted to mention, before I move on, I came back to this, obviously, different model. Pewter is actually malleable, which is a good and bad thing. It's good because if you have one that the legs, like he's not standing because the legs are all bent, you can easily move those legs back. But the bad thing about it is that when you're prepping them, you don't realize when you're putting pressure on legs and stuff that it starts to bend them in odd directions. So you want to be very careful when you prep, because, this guy's leg is really weak. I mean, look at that. But he's also like a second and kind of a messed up guy, as you can see anyway. But it can, depending on, how thin the legs are, move really, really easily. And then you don't want to move them too much, because the more you move them, the weaker they'll get, and then they'll snap. So just be careful. You'll be able to hear and feel when it starts to weaken it, like it's got like a crunchy sort of sound. So just keep your eye when you're, prepping the legs and stuff, they're ultimately probably going to move while you're prepping them anyway, but just be careful when you do that. Just, rest your one finger up against the side when you're doing the other side and stuff like that. But if you sit there and you're laying him down and you're sanding him like this, you're going to push that leg in really easily. Another good thing about that they're malleable is that, like, if you drop these guys, I have dropped these guys a ton of times, and only one time I've had 2 back legs fall off. But that was probably a defect in the pewter or something. But they rarely break. They mostly just bend. But again, the more you bend them, the more you move them, the weaker they're going to get, and then you can break them. So just be careful with that. And okay, moving on back to our scheduled programming. Yeah, so you want to start with, so you can see some seams in here and such. So with these guys, you just actually, let me show you the belly, because that's what's going to be the easiest for me to show you. I'm trying to get this seam here, but you can see, hopefully. You're going to need a little elbow grease too. And I also recommend diamond coated needle files because they last longer and they're better. I have not had any luck with regular files because they gunk up on the first try, and usually they just don't work as well. I don't know, I've never had a good experience with them, so I have a whole bunch of regular files that I never use because of that. So the diamond coated ones, my guess is they're probably like fake diamonds anyway, because they're pretty darn cheap. So but either way, I would go with them. They look like this. They're usually like a lighter color. Also be careful, sometimes the handles on some of them have lead in them, so just I'm not a big fan of touching lead. So anyway, so as you can see, I filed that little seam on the belly here, but if you look, it almost looks like, oh my god, look at all these scratches, but that's not a big deal. If you see, and I take this is the steel wool, and I buff it up, it shines it up really nice, and it doesn't look like such a mess anymore. So, I mean, that's pretty much the basics of it. And then, for the divots, like, see this divot here? It's focusing. Here we go. There's like a divot right there that needs to be filled, and let's do a quick demonstration. This is the spot putty, and I recently discovered that these are so much easier to apply with a color shaper or any sort of rubbery tool or tip or something, so you don't touch it, because this stuff dries really fast, and it's annoying to get off your hands, and it just smells, and ugh. So anyway, and then you just rub it basically in that area. I don't really like touching it, but just trying to do this quick to show you guys. But it usually fills in so there. Okay, so we just did a little bit of a mess here, and it's not even whatever, but I filled that little area. But the great thing about this stuff is that it sands really well. So this is gonna smooth out really nicely when we start sanding. So I'm gonna let it dry for a second. It actually dries really fast, so probably by the time let's do another one while we're waiting for that to dry. Ugh, this stuff smells. I really need to put a mask on. Ugh. Okay, let's do this one here. This little divot here. You see how it kind of like fills it in right there? See that? So we'll leave that a little messy, because then we could just sand it and it gives it a nice smooth finish. Those are the pretty major divots. There's a little one here. Could be part of his wrinkle, but I don't like the way it looks. It's too deep. So see that? I've filled that right in. Alright. So that's probably sandable now. So I'm going to take my sanding sponge. It's pretty fine. It's just too... I mean, you don't want to go crazy sanding this stuff. It's not like, you know... Not like plastic or resin where it's tough. The sand's really nice. And then we can take our stainless steel and buff it. But as you can see, how nicely that smoothed right off. I mean, this probably need to go again. I just did this really quick, but you could see how that stuff just filled in the divots there. It's in the little holes there now. Hopefully you can see. Yeah, you can see that. So yeah, you want to just basically use that stuff. Or, I mean, you could do that with epoxy too. Just mix up some epoxy, put it in the areas. I don't have the patience to wait for it to dry for small things like this. Like, it's not necessary for little divots like this. Actually, yeah, look, I sanded this part, and this filled in those divots really nicely. So we're just going to have to keep going and, you know, keep looking at it, make sure everything's good to go. And then when you've got your first pass down, well, this actually, I wouldn't do this putty stuff before I bathe it. You want to make sure you get any sort of, I don't know, mold release. I don't know if the really pewters have mold release. I don't know how that works. But I wash them anyway. So what I do is I first go through with all my sanding and scraping and picking and whatever, basically smoothing it out. And then for divot filling, then I'll wash it. What I do is I use any sort of soap. I mean, dish soap is probably the best because it's, you know, gets grease off. So dish soap would work good, but I just use any old soap. And then I go over it with baking soda, because then that gets in all the grooves and stuff, and a toothbrush. Then I rinse that. Then I do another baking soda only, and then I rinse that. And that should be good to go. And then I take it back for the second pass, and that's with the, you know, the putties and the epoxies and the fixing and all that stuff, because now you've gotten all that release off, so you don't have to worry about it lifting or anything because of some sort of release between the epoxy and the model. So yeah, so this, I'm going to take this out anyway. Acetone should take that off. And then that's pretty much how it goes. And then, you know, after you wash them, like I said, you put more, you know, you do the epoxy work, smooth that out, wash them again, same way, and then you do light priming to see if you missed any areas. Just very light, just to see, because if you're going to have to keep going, it's going to be very annoying if you've already fully primed him really thick. So, plus you don't want to go thick on these guys anyway, because it'll obscure the detail really quickly. For the little guys with a lot of detail, I actually like to use the I say Tamiya, and now I recently discovered that I think it's pronounced Tamiya, but I'm still saying Tamiya. So I use the Tamiya primer on the little guys, or resins with very fine detail that'll get covered really easily, because it's the Tamiya Extra Fine, so it doesn't obscure detail, and it's got decent coverage. It's kind of like the Krylon, but with better coverage, and just better. The only thing I don't like is that it smells. So I don't use it often, only when I need to use it. Otherwise, I mean, you can use any primer on this. I would not recommend using Bullseye Primer, the 123. It's very thick, so this will just be a blob when you're done priming this. So Rust-Oleum is fine, just be careful, because that's also a little thick, but it's fine if you spray it properly. But anyway, you just want to do a very thin layer the first time to check and see if you missed anything. If you did, then you go back in with your putty or your files and you fix it. And then you prime them. So, I mean, that's pretty much it. It's pretty much exactly the same as any resin or plastic. You know, you just need a little more elbow grease with these tools, and these tools will make your life easier. You could use sandpaper too, but I don't like sandpaper. It, like, sands off my fingers, and they get bruised fingers. I don't like it. So, but that's that. I hope this helps, and it wasn't too confusing and all over the place, because I'm just getting back in the studio now from a week of vacation. So, yeah. So, thanks for watching.